These are two of my favorite works ever created, and if I were to ask you to find similarities that connects them for me, what would you say? Maybe you say they were made a while ago, and maybe I'm just viewing them through a lens of borrowed nostalgia for a time I didn't even live through. You point out how both have striking, unforgettable visuals that somehow bleed into your memory. And sure, that can all be true, but for me, the connection goes deeper. It has less to do with what's drawn or written, and everything to do with who drew it, who wrote it. James O'Barr and Hideaki Anno, both creators did something that shaped not just their work, but the way I understand art and what it can be. They took real, personal suffering, grief, depression, and turned it into something transcendent. For O'Barr, it was the unspeakable loss of a loved one. For Anno, it was years of deep depression. And through their pain, they didn't just make stories. They made something that will last the test of time. Before we get into the rest of the video, I just want to say I'm not trying to romanticize the idea of the tortured artist. It's more about the artist using their experience to shape their work. And also, honestly, I wanted to make a video about something a bit more positive. If you look at this channel, you'll see I've leaned more into criticism, diving into the flaws, the frustrating tropes, the moments where the stories fall short. And that's fine, that's part of being a fan too. But I do want to make videos about things I resonated with. First off, let's talk about The Crow. This channel has only been about anime so far. Obviously, that's not the only thing I love. Games, comics, films, they've all been a part of my life just as long as anime. I grew up on a mix of Saturday morning cartoons and late night video game sessions. Stuff like watching Teen Titans on Cartoon Network, reading whatever comics I could find at my school library, and playing Ratchet and Clank on the PS2. All of this shaped me just as much as anime ever did. There's also this whole other side of my taste that's rooted in grungy, edgy, punk, goth-tinted media of the 90s and 2000s. So when I first saw the 1994 film The Crow in my mid to late teens, it was just like discovering something made just for me. I watched it at the perfect time, around when I was diving headfirst into bands like Bring Me the Horizon and Pierce the Veil, or that alternative medical kind of music. And The Crow, it was everything I wanted in a movie. The mood, the grit, the rain-soaked visuals, the sense of urban decay and tragic beauty. The soundtrack, Nine Inch Nails, The Cure, Stone Temple Pilots. It was opening a portal into a whole era of early 90s music I haven't explored yet, except for bands like Nirvana and the metal my parents listened to, and I fell for it hard. It was then I discovered bands like Sunny Day Real Estate. But beyond the visuals, it was the story that really stuck with me. The raw gothic revenge tale, rooted in love, loss, and something a little supernatural. It wasn't just dark for the sake of being edgy, like other shows and movies I watched. It felt like it had heart, pain, and meaning. After watching the film, I immediately spiraled into a deep dive, not just into the film itself, but everything around it. Brendan Lee's reference for the comic and his tragic death during the film hit me like a punch to the gut. Reading about how it happened, how his co-star Michael Massey struggled with the guilt, and how the production had to carry on after such a devastating loss. It added this real-world weight to a story that already felt haunted. I even found small tidbits like how the Wachowskis originally wanted Brendan Lee to play Neo in The Matrix, another one of my favorite films. I wanted to know everything about The Crow and Brendan Lee. I watched his earlier films, I read interviews, retrospectives, behind the scenes, anything that could help me understand who he was and what this role meant to him. And of course, I read The Crow graphic novel by James O'Barr, and honestly, as much as I love the movie, the comic hits even harder. James O'Barr was given the birthday of January 1st, 1960, not because he was born then, but because no one actually knew when he was born. When Child Protective Services took him from his mother, she was too drunk to remember the day her son came into the world.
I was born in a trailer, and I got taken to the hospital like sometime in the next week, and my birth mother was so drunk and out of it that she couldn't remember exactly when I was born. It was between Christmas and New Year's, she said, so they made my birthday January 1st. I'm the New Year's hope.
He spent his formative years bouncing between orphanages and foster homes, growing up in the cracks of a system that didn't seem to have a place for him.
I didn't get adopted till I was about 7. And so I spent, a lot of time with a large group of kids, and with very few parental figures. And then when I did go out to be loaned out to some families on the weekends, it was never for very long. And a lot of times it just wasn't a very good situation. I mean, some of these people shouldn't have been allowed to have pets, let alone children. And I think there was a lot of monetary incentive for these people to do that type of thing, where they would get $100 to take a kid for the weekend. So when I was younger, I found it was best to just, be quiet, don't draw attention to yourself, just kind of go over into the corner and entertain yourself for a while, and try not to bring anything bad down on yourself. And in fact, I'm sure some of these families that I went with thought I was retarded or something, because I never said a word, and I didn't interact with anybody. I just kind of stayed to myself. So So as a result of that, I didn't have very good communication skills as I grew up.
The only constant in his life was drawing. It became his refuge, his escape. He wasn't absorbed with the tales of superheroes, no, but the darker, moodier comics of monsters. Then, at 16, something shifted. He met a girl named Beverly, his polar opposite in every way. Where he was brooding and quiet, she was warm and full of light. She grounded him. For a kid who'd grown up surrounded by instability and loneliness, Beverly was kind of an anchor.
Up until I was like 16, I kind of felt like my life was this endurance test that I had to get through. It was like, well, what more could be thrown at me? I kind of felt like God had his elbow on my neck my whole life. It was like I just had to get to the end of it. I had to get to the end of the race, and then, then good things would happen. And when I was 16, I met this girl, and she was like an angel to me. I mean, she was just, absolutely everything I had ever wanted. And I thought, I did it. I got to the end of the race. I got, for not caving in, for not surrendering, for, fighting through that 16 years of difficulty. I finally got to the end, and I've got, I've got the prize. And she was like the exact opposite of me. I was, dark and brooding and sarcastic and really venomous and everything. And she was like, just like this bright white light who was always happy. And I never heard her say a foul word or a word against anyone. If I would like verbally attack someone, she would point out their good points. And so it was like I don't know, it was like positive and negative. We just kind of fit together perfect. And it was just like a perfect balance. And, and everything that I had found, wanting in human nature, she would point out the positive aspects of it. So I don't know, I was really enamored of her, and I just, it was like meeting someone, and I just could not find any fault with her at all. And she was just like a shining light in my life.
But that life was never given a chance to start. In 1979, when James was around 18, Beverly was killed by a drunk driver on her way to pick him up. Just like that, she was gone, ripped away by a random senseless act. The loss of Beverly broke James O'Barr.
And we were together for like every day for probably 3 years. And we were engaged, and we were supposed to be married after we graduated. And she was killed by a drunk driver. And I was like pretty much just destroyed. Everything that I had worked for, had been working up to, was wrapped around this person, and suddenly she was gone for no good reason. I mean, it's not like she had an illness or it was something that was anticipated. Just like one day out of the blue, somebody decided to get drunk and drive down a side street at 70 miles an hour, and suddenly she was just gone.
In the aftermath of Beverly's death, with his work completely upended and no clear path forward, O'Barr did what a lot of young people do in pain. He ran, not in a literal sense, but emotionally. He joined the military, not out of patriotism or ambition, but out of desperation. He needed structure. He needed distance. He spent his days drawing technical manuals, blueprints, and diagrams for machinery, weapons, and systems. It was all rigid, emotionless work. Eventually, though, the numbness cracked. He couldn't keep everything bottled up anymore. So he picked up a pen. Not for work, but for himself. He began sketching something darker, something personal. It started off as fragments, images of violence, loss and longing. And slowly, those pictures began to form the shape of a story. That story became The Crow. It wasn't born from a place of genre or style. It wasn't designed to be a bestseller or cult classic. It was born from grief, from real pain, from Beverly, yes, but also shaped by something else he came across. A news report of a young couple who had been murdered for a $20 engagement ring. So The Crow became his. It was raw, gritty, imperfect, and that's exactly what made it so powerful. Every line he drew, every word he wrote, was another piece of his pain finding form. The protagonist, Eric, wasn't just a character. He was a vessel, an embodiment of grief that refused to fade away quietly. A man brought back from the dead not just to seek vengeance. But even as O'Barr poured his soul into it, it didn't bring him the peace he hoped for. He later said, "I thought it'd be a catharsis if I could channel all this anger and frustration onto paper." And it turned out the exact opposite. Every page became a little death. And yet, through that pain, something lasting, something honest was created. The Crow is not just a comic. It's an emotional outlet, and maybe that's why it resonates so deeply with so many people. It's not trying to teach a lesson or offer closure. It's just true to what O'Barr felt at that time. I first watched Evangelion when I was the same age as the characters, 14 or 15. At that point, I was a shy, introverted teen, still trying to figure out who I was and what place I had in the world. It's safe to say that I connected with them on a level that I hadn't with any other character before. These weren't just typical anime protagonists. They were teenagers who felt like they had more in common with me than any heroic figure with flashy powers or simple goals. Shinji, Rei, Asuka, they weren't just characters who fought giant monsters. They were deeply flawed, emotional women, and all grappling with their own personal struggles. Trauma, abandonment, anxiety, loneliness. Evangelion didn't shy away from these difficult topics. Instead, it immerses you in them, showing the complexities of what it means to be a teenager trying to navigate the world. And for someone like me who was equally trying to make sense of myself and my impressions, it felt like a mirror. I saw pieces of myself reflected back at me through them, but in ways that weren't always comfortable. Shinji's isolation, his fear of rejection, and his tendency to shut himself off from others hit close to home. You feel his hesitation, that constant push-pull between wanting to be understood and fearing the pain that comes with letting others in. And Asuka's explosive anger, her need to be seen as strong despite all the vulnerabilities beneath the surface, spoke to my own attempts to mask my insecurity. Rei too, with her sense of detachment, her struggle to find her own identity in a world that constantly demanded conformity, it resonated with me in a way that was almost eerie. What made Evangelion different from any other anime I watched, though, wasn't just that it addressed these things, it's how deeply it went into them. The show doesn't offer easy answers or neat resolutions. It doesn't romanticize the character's pain or flaws. Instead, it forces you to sit with the discomfort, to examine the messiness of being human in all its forms. And that, more than anything, was what felt real to me. It wasn't just the plot or the cool mecha battles, though those were exciting in their own right. It was the emotional depth, the rawness of what these teenagers were going through. It was seeing that vulnerability in a show. Evangelion stayed with me throughout my life. It wasn't just a show I watched and then moved on from. It became a part of me. And with the ending of the last movie, Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0, Thrice Upon a Time, it felt like a piece of me was closing. It wasn't just the end of a story. It was the end of this journey I had been on for over a decade. I felt like I had lived alongside Shinji, Rei, Asuka, and the others through their pain, growth, and confusion. And when those credits finally rolled, it was as if they had completed their own arc of redemption. Just like with The Crow, my love for Evangelion led me to dive deeper into its creator, Hideaki Anno. I wanted to understand how a man from a different country, from a completely different background, could create something so personal, so deeply relatable to someone like me. He was older than me, he had lived a different life, experienced his own battles with depression. And yet here was the show that felt like it understood me. I wanted to know more about the man behind Evangelion, and what led him to create such a raw, emotionally devastating narrative. During the creation of Neon Genesis Evangelion, Hideaki Anno wrote, "I try to include everything of myself in Neon Genesis Evangelion. Myself, a broken man who could do nothing for 4 years, a man who ran away for 4 years, one who was simply not dead. Then one thought, you can't run away, came to me, and I restarted this production. It was a production where my only thought was to burn my feelings into film." It's both fascinating and deeply moving to consider how Anno channeled years of psychological anguish, isolation, and creative paralysis into a piece of media that would go on to become such a cultural milestone. Rather than hiding from his depression, Anno made it the core of Evangelion. The series began as a mecha anime, but slowly unravels into a layered psychological drama, reflecting Anno's own unraveling and reconstruction of himself. About halfway through production, Anno experienced a creative impasse, particularly with the character Rei Ayanami. She had been conceived as a distant, emotionless figure, but Anno struggled to develop her further. At a friend's suggestion, he began reading about mental illness. Through this, he unexpectedly found language and insight into his own psychological state. He began to understand his depression not as a vague fog, but as a defined, shared human condition. This revelation deeply influenced the direction of the series. The narrative became more introspective and darker, leaning heavily into themes of identity, trauma, and self-worth. From that point on, Evangelion transformed. What began as a story about giant robots defending humanity became a brutally honest portrait of the human psyche. The series pushed deeper into existential questions. Characters no longer just fought external monsters, they confronted the ones within themselves. And in the final 2 episodes of the TV series, created under intense budgetary constrictions and creative pressure, the narrative abandons conventional structure entirely. Instead, it enters the fragmented mind of Shinji Ikari, forcing him to confront his fear of rejection, his need for connection, and his own self-hatred. These episodes are polarizing, but they represent the rawest articulation of Anno's inner world. However, finishing Evangelion didn't bring Anno peace. Instead, it left him in a state of emotional crisis. According to some reports, he found himself spiraling once again, even contemplating some very dark things. It's said that Heiho Miyazaki, a close friend and mentor, reached out to console him during this time, a gesture that perhaps helped bring Anno back from the brink. Despite, or perhaps because of, the ambiguity and psychological fragmentation of the TV ending, Eva became a massive commercial and cultural success. But instead of resting on that success, Anno made the end of Evangelion a cinematic retelling and expansion of the final episodes. Far from offering closure in a conventional sense, the film is a fever dream of despair, nihilism, and explosive visual metaphor. It directly responds to both fan backlash and Anno's inner turmoil. It deconstructs the series, the characters, and even the audience, confronting viewers with the uncomfortable truth of their own complicity in escapist media. The end of Evangelion is brutal. Characters die violently, hope is repeatedly snatched away, the line between reality and hallucination dissolves, and yet, amid the ruin and bloodshed, Anno offers a final glimmer of hope. A quiet moment where Shinji chooses to continue living. The message is hard won. Life may be painful, people may hurt you, but connection is still possible. There is still a choice to keep going. The end of Evangelion remained the final entry in the franchise for around a decade, standing as both a conclusion and a kind of emotional exorcism for Anno. It wasn't until 2007 that he returned to the world of Evangelion with the reboot series, beginning with Evangelion 1.0, You Are Not Alone. On the surface, this reboot seemed like a more polished, accessible retelling of the original series, but beneath that was the same wounded heart. Anno once again found himself grappling with depression during the production of these films, particularly as the story diverged in increasingly unfamiliar and experimental territory. The final entry, Evangelion 3.0 plus 1.0 Thrice Upon a Time, released in 2021, marked the true conclusion of the Evangelion saga, not just narratively, but emotionally. Unlike the end of Evangelion, this film ends not in an apocalypse, but in something gentler and more human. It is the story of someone finally letting go of trauma, of fantasy, of the need to understand through suffering alone. In this sense, Evangelion became a decades-long diary, one that began in anguish and ended with the tentative steps towards healing. Obara and Anno both put themselves into their work in ways that almost feels invasive to witness, like we're seeing something not meant to be shared. And yet it's been offered to us anyway, raw and unguarded. Neither The Crow nor Evangelion were created as acts of healing, at least not consciously, and neither creator walked away from their work fully at peace. If anything, they carried the same wounds with them after the final pages were inked or the last frame rendered. But what they did accomplish was far more rare. They made art that genuinely mattered, not just in terms of influence, but in a deeply personal way. It resonated with others who felt the same kind of pain. What's striking is how these two stories, so different in genre, tone, and aesthetic, both serve as vessels for emotional truth. One is a bleak, stylized gothic revenge tale born from a sudden personal tragedy. The other is a surreal, introspective mecha anime that becomes a sprawling meditation on depression, identity, and the impossibility of human connection. They exist in separate artistic worlds, but they reach the same place in the human heart. You can feel them in every page of The Crow, in every shaky line and caption soaked in grief. You can feel Anno in every distorted frame of Evangelion, in every moment Shinji flinches from love or begs for someone to tell him he deserves to exist. These stories aren't just fictional narrative, they are emotional documents. They are expressions of an internal landscape most people don't dare to show. That's why they mean so much to me. It's not just about the style or the setting or the surface level story, it's about truth. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and broken and still trying to make sense of itself. The kind of truth that doesn't offer easy answers, but at least lets you know you're not the only one asking the questions. These are the kinds of stories I return to, the ones that bleed emotion onto the page. The ones that carry with them the weight of the creator's emotions, the scars of their experiences, their darkest moments, and their fiercest struggles. These aren't just stories, they are fragments of a person laid bare, offering you something raw, something honest, and at times something profoundly uncomfortable. They weren't crafted with the intention of to entertain, meet the demands of an audience, or to fit within the neat boxes of genre conventions. These stories were born from a place of survival, created by artists who poured themselves into the work, not because they thought it would save them, but because it was the only way they knew how to keep going. When creators like Hideaki Anno and James O'Barr pour their deepest emotions into their projects, whether it's this existential anguish of Evangelion or the raw, painful catharsis of The Crow, they leave us with something that feels far more substantial than entertainment. These stories are not just fictional narratives that can be consumed and forgotten. They are enduring and visceral. In every sketch, every frame, every line of dialogue, we can sense the artist's struggles, their personal wounds, their attempt to make sense of the pain, loss, and alienation. And in doing so, they offer us more than just a glimpse of their own world. They offer us a chance to see ourselves, to recognize that the questions we wrestle with, the loneliness we feel, and the battles we fight in our minds are shared. There's a strange, painful beauty in that act of creation, beauty that comes not from perfection, but from honesty, from the vulnerability of offering something that isn't easy to show, something that doesn't offer closure, doesn't promise redemption, but simply exists as it is. It's the beauty of art made from the creator's emotions, of art that doesn't try to tie up loose ends, instead leaves us with an open reflection of life itself. And in receiving that raw, untamed emotion, there's comfort in knowing that even if the artist didn't find peace or resolution in their work, they've at least created something that speaks to us. That's where the true power lies. Not in the solutions these stories offer, but in the shared experiences of confronting our deepest vulnerabilities. That's why these works resonate so deeply with me, and with so many others, because in the end, they aren't about the artist's pain or the character's journeys. They are about the power of art transcending individual suffering to forge connections between souls who might never meet, but who share the same pain.